Pastor Rick. Welcome back to another episode of Living by the Book.
Thank you.
So I have another question for you if you're ready.
Okay.
And even if you're not, I'm going to ask it anyway. So the camera's rolling.
This isn't a trick question, right?
I wouldn't do that to you. No, I wouldn't do that to you. No, the question today is about suffering. And we've talked about suffering a couple of times, I think even on this blog, from a couple of different angles. And the Bible has a lot to say about suffering, which is why I think so many different kinds of questions come up about it. One that I was thinking of, though, is that the Bible in some ways presents suffering as a good thing, or it presents suffering as a positive thing. There's a sense in which Peter and James call us to embrace suffering, to rejoice in the midst of suffering. And I think for someone who's going through that, that's easier said than done, right? I think that the question that would often pop up is how can I be expected to view this as in any way positive? So I'd love for you to just, real briefly walk us through either a passage or just kind of holistically, why is it that the Bible would tell us to do that? What is it about suffering that we can view as positive? Why is that?
Well, God, in His management and administration of our lives, knows exactly what He desires to accomplish in us and through us. Mm-hmm. And we have every confidence that when we suffer, whether it's a disease, whether it's some deprivation of some kind, whether it's relational friction, loss of job, whatever it may be, that His intention in the midst of that is to allow us to experience the sustaining grace that is otherwise unknowable. There is a certain grace that God gives, knowing that He has promised that He will not allow us to be tested above what we're able, right? But will, with the temptation or testing, is the same word, also make a way of escape that we'll be able to bear it. So He promises that He will not allow us to suffer beyond what we're able. Now, we commonly think we are past what we're able. Right. And very often when we believe we're past what we're able, it's because we have depended primarily on internal resources or natural resources. Right. And they are always going to fall short. Yeah, they're limited. But the strength that we have in the inner man, given to us by the Spirit of God, where Paul even talks about in the outward man I'm perishing, but in the inward man I'm being renewed day by day. Right. That sustaining grace of God that is known by people who are called by God to suffer enables them to work through that suffering and get to where they are persevering, faithful to the Lord, in a demonstration of the veracity and reality of grace and their faith. In James, you mentioned that in verse 2 of chapter 1. He says... which, by the way, verse 1 talks about the fact that it's to the 12 tribes who are in dispersion, right? So they're scattered and they're suffering. They're actively suffering. There is suffering going on, right? He says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing," and this is the reason that you can consider it joy, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So God is perfecting you, refining you through your suffering. And I can't remember the verse. It's in Psalms. I don't remember exactly where. You might remember. It talks about that. Oh, it's in Job. No, it's in Job, where he says that when I am tried, I will come forth as gold. Right? That's that notion that Job had of hope, that God, this isn't pointless. I don't understand what it is. I don't get it. I don't think I deserve it. I haven't done anything. And that's his whole point to his friends. I haven't done anything. He's blameless. I haven't denied God. I haven't committed sin. I haven't done. And his friends are all saying, you had to have. Because people who are righteous don't suffer like this. And Job is saying, no, I haven't done anything. And so the indictment of God's sovereign purposes in Job's life that Job's friends perpetrated, insulted God, and he held them accountable at the end.
Right.
And afflicted them until Job
offered
sacrifices for them, right?
Yeah.
And that took him off the hook.
Yeah.
As Job displayed grace toward those who had been his grievous friends, who had just denigrated, accused.
Right.
And by accusing Job and saying you must have sinned because God would not do this if you had not sinned, was an indictment of God's freedom to do what he wishes to bring himself glory in someone's life. So God took personally Job's friend's indictment of Job, right?
Yeah.
Demonstrating that God does bring suffering into our lives for the purpose of bringing himself glory and enabling us to be verified as vessels of honor who have received his grace. And that's what James is advocating, that it produces endurance, and endurance, having its perfect result, will result in you being perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Right. So there is an improvement, a refining, a value that is associated with going through those kinds of trials.
Right.
And, the trials of persecution, particularly throughout the book of James, is identified as a means by which believers are able to bring God glory through his faithfulness to them and their faithful reliance upon him.
Right.
The same is said in 1 Peter chapter 1, where it talks about, in this you greatly rejoice, verse 6, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And there is this obtaining in verse 9 as the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. So there is this demonstration of the reality of grace and the operation of grace in your life that trials and distress produce, that enables the forging of a character that models and demonstrates the fact that you relish the love of God even in the midst of distresses. That you aren't separated from that. That's what Paul talks about in Romans chapter 8, where he is describing the distresses through which they go. And he says in verse 35, who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will tribulations, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, sword? But in all these things, verse 37 says, we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor heights, nor depth, nor any other created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus, our Lord. So as we rely on God in the midst of suffering, we encounter and experience a depth of the love of God that is unknowable without the depth of distress that through which we go.
Right.
And so God uses distresses and suffering as a means by which both his grace and the depth of his grace and his love and the depth of his love is able to be plunged by the person being overwhelmed by their circumstances. Right. And let's be clear, there are circumstances that God often calls us to go through that I would say seemingly overwhelm us. But God, again, has promised you're not going to be overwhelmed.
Right.
I'm going to give you what you need in order to endure it faithfully.
Right.
If we're just challenged by, in Hebrews, that we are to...
I am of Apollos.
That we are to beware lest we fall short of the grace of God, and a root of bitterness springing up defile many. So the option is bitterness toward God, which grieves the Spirit of God, quenches the Spirit of God, and mutes the volume of God's love and grace in your life. Right. Yeah. You absent yourself from all that through resenting God and questioning God and what have I done to deserve this? And the better question is, this is a fraction of what you deserve. What did you do to deserve my kindness and love and mercy?
What did you do to deserve only this?
Right. Yeah. So there is this warped view that bitterness produces that God has no right to do this to me.
Right. Right.
Or I have not done anything that deserves this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is a delirious perspective, demonstrating that you really don't understand grace.
Yeah.
Because if you understood grace, you're having a great day if you're outside of hell.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Really.
Yeah.
If you're not in hell, you're having a great day.
Yeah.
As bad as things are.
Yeah.
Right? Now you say, I'm on a hell on earth. Well, that's so insipid with reference to the realities of what hell actually is.
Right.
Right? That nothing on this earth is comparable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think, as we go through this, our responsibility, as we're told in the book of Hebrews, is to be careful that we don't fall short of the grace that God is making available.
Yeah.
Which then again, I shouldn't say then again, it demonstrates the presuppositional platform that God is providing you all the grace you need in order to go through it.
Right.
Just don't fall short of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
And so the purposes for those things is the modeling of grace, the provision of grace. And, there are people that in the midst of their sorrow, they don't know which end is up. They're struggling to survive. They're not certain they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But then after they get through it and they look back at it, they're able to say it is indescribable. The level of grace and comfort that God was providing us as we went through it. Sometimes we didn't sense it or recognize it. But it's still, as we look back on it, God was so faithful to us, and He sustained us in it all.
Yeah.
And we need to be in the midst of our distresses and our difficulties, taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ and thinking on things that are worthy of Christ, not imputing to Him unworthy thoughts, unworthy accusations and presuppositions and conclusions and adjudications and judgments against Him that He's unworthy and He's not treating me fairly and I don't deserve this. He's being unjust, or all the things that Satan is yapping about in your ear.
Right.
You don't want to embrace any of that, but you want to draw near to God, humble yourself before the Lord, and He draws near to you and just showers you with the grace that you need to endure faithfully to the end.
Yeah.
Now, it may result in your burning at a stake. Your suffering, your persecution may result in you having an absolutely awful death.
Right.
It did with some of our forefathers in the faith.
Yeah.
They stayed true. They were faithful. They suffered, truly suffered. They were beaten and they were mocked and they were tried and ridiculed in public, in trials, and then they were put on a pyre and they were lit and burned alive, right? Or hung, or decapitated, or pierced through with a sword, as Hebrews 11 describes. But in the midst of all of it, they patterned their suffering after our Lord, who suffered greatly. Yeah. And in that passage in 1 Peter chapter 2, there is this passage, and I'll close with this. I think we're getting close to long enough. In verse 21 of 1 Peter 2, for you have been called for this very purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example to follow in His steps, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in His mouth. And while being reviled, He did not revile in return. While suffering, He uttered no threats, but, and here's what I'm wanting to see, kept entrusting Himself to Him who judges righteously. Kept entrusting Himself all the way through His suffering, being pierced with a crown of thorns, being scourged, being beaten with fists, spit upon, crucified, hanging on the cross, all of it. He kept entrusting Himself to the judge, or to the one who judges righteously. And I think that's our marching order. That's what we do. We just trust God who judges righteously. And I'm suffering, but it's okay. I don't understand it all. I don't know why He's doing what He's doing, except to say this: everything God does is for the purpose of bringing Himself glory. There is no motive that is appropriate for God's pursuits rather than His glory. If He sought something other than His glory, he would be falling short of his glory,
Right.
and that's the essence of sin.
Right.
So
Right.
his glory is what he has to seek.
Yeah.
In our suffering,
Yeah.
whether it's, a situation of, as Romans gave you that litany of things that are unable to separate us in that Romans 8 passage. It's an interesting thing to recognize that there's tribulation, which I summarize as difficulty, distress, persecution, which I described as discrimination, famine, which is deprivation, nakedness, which is destitution, peril, which is despair, and sword, which is a dagger. So I alliterated all those,
But
the point is that
Right.
that there isn't anything
Right.
that's going to separate us from
Yeah,
God.
it's like he's covering all the categories.
All the categories, all the bases.
Yeah.
He's going through and he's
Yeah.
saying, there isn't anything that God's not going to use to bring himself glory in
Yeah.
your life. And
Yeah.
if he calls on you to go through one or more of those things, realize that attending your call is the grace to go through it. The verse that says, faithful is he who calls you, who also will do it. Paul says to the Thessalonians.
Yeah.
So faithful is he who calls you, who also will do it. And so if he calls you to suffer, he will give you all the grace and resource that you need in order to endure that suffering in a manner that brings him glory.
Yeah.
And we have to just be careful we don't fall short of the grace.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And I mean, the Bible is so rich in how it talks about suffering. It's just good to remind
There's so
ourselves.
much more in here too.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's other places.
I
you
just
could
took
go.
a flat stone and skipped
Right.
it 3 or 4 times across the water.
Yeah. No, it's just helpful, and I think we need those reminders. Because when you're in the middle of it, you do lose that perspective, and it's good to be reminded of that God is doing. Paul talks about how he's producing in us a weight of glory beyond all. He's reminding us that there's something that he's doing in the midst of that suffering that we can't see. So thank you for taking us through that.
Amen.
And I trust that it'll bless many as you listen to it. So church, we're thinking of you as we go through these, as we work through these questions. We do pray that this is encouraging to you, and that no matter what situation you may find yourself in, that you remember that not only has God provided you the grace to get through it, but he is doing something that will both glorify himself and will be for your good in the end. So church, we love you, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Living by the Book. Take care.